Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Digitally. It's one that I'm incredibly excited about, and I have been looking forward to this because I have a fantastic guest for today. And I think you're going to really enjoy listening to her and learning about some of the things that she's been involved in. And it's Lake Dai. For those of you that haven't met Lake already, I'll say three things about her, just so you get to know her. Number one, she's an operator. Look, Lake has about 20 years of operating experience building, running, scaling products. She was one of the early employees at Alibaba and head of product for them. She then led the search engine team at Yahoo. She's got 5 US patents in search algorithms, recommendation algorithms, and text tokenization, among others. And so it's just great to have someone with that caliber of experience with us today. But she's also an educator. She's an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and I can see her backdrop, and you'll see this, and you'll know that she's very closely associated with them, and she teaches applied AI there, and it's just fantastic to have that perspective here as well. But third, and just as importantly, Lake's an investor. She's a venture capitalist. She's a partner at LDV Ventures, and they're a deep tech Silicon Valley VC firm. And there she's leading their investments in the AI and the big data and compute space. And so with all of that, is sleeves rolled up, directly involved in many of the new initiatives and the new investments that are going in, and has a really up close and personal look to investments in the AI space. So with all of that, Lake, we're so happy to have you here, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Lake, I want to pick up an area that I know I mentioned to you would be of high interest, which is the whole area of artificial intelligence. And particularly as we work with large enterprises across the globe, we're finding that AI is taking off very quickly. And it's really in the last few years. I mean, we've talked about AI all along, and we've had its ups and downs, but it's the last few years has just been magical. And I'll say one other thing, we worked with MIT recently, and we did a survey of Fortune 500 CIOs globally. And there were 3 things that came out as top investment areas. Number 3 on the list was actually AI. So we're seeing now AI is in the mainstream, it's happening now. And I guess my question for you is, why now?
Yeah, that's a great question, because AI is not a new concept. It actually was first created in the 50s, and then university continued taught artificial intelligence over the decades. The reason that it was really start taking off a few years ago is because the 3 main drives. The first one is computing power. So primarily led by NVIDIA's GPU. So the acceleration of computing power really gave deep learning a strong boost of how things can be computed much faster. The second thing is data. We all know that in the past that enterprise have a lot of data, but now we are contributing to the data as well. So we have smartphone with us, we're constantly taking pictures and videos. And if you walk into merchandising, retail or manufacturing factory, you can see cameras everywhere. So the recent study shows that we are really seeing a worse data is on an accelerated growth rate, 66% each year. So that really enables it. And then the last thing is algorithm, right? So we talk about all different machine learning models and all the innovations from universities, from industries. And then most recently, there are actually a lot of specialized models for specific use cases. All of the 3, computing power, data, algorithm, really accelerated. So maybe you probably have been invited to panels, let's say 5-6 years ago, we have to talk about, is AI real? So now nobody want to talk about it. Now just talk about how do we scale AI in enterprise, right?
Yeah, that's right. So AI, I think interest is always there, but as you said, compute is new, and that's actually given us the raw materials and the power to do something about it. Yeah. Data is now proliferating in a way that we actually use it and actually harvest that. And then the third ingredient set is all of the algorithms and the specialized, and it's a little bit of building on the shoulders of giants. So, every step is an enhancement of the previous one, and that's actually brought us where we are. It is fantastic to see. And so with that now, maybe shifting away from your view of AI as a professor, adjunct professor, to your view of AI as an investor, where's the money at? Where's spending right now? What are the best industry applications you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so I got this question quite a bit. So where are enterprises spending AI? Is autonomous driving, because they constantly make to the news, right? But actually, the top 4 industries spend more than 50% worldwide spending on AI are the 4 categories. Number 1 is retail and the financial services, healthcare, and manufacturing. So this 4 are still contributing over 50% of it. And if you think about retail, some of them may very quickly come out with, oh, the camera watching you, like, basically you can self-checking, all these different things, but there are many aspects. So there are customer services and engagement. Think about the chatbot you're talking to when you try to make a return on Amazon, right? There are demand predictions and product pricing recommendations, and think about how do we do the pricing? How do we, based on users' behavior, demand of the market, how do we price it, for example, airline prices, right? And then there are supply chain and logistic management. So how do I route it to most efficient route to the customers for the best delivery at lowest cost? And there's payment processing. And this is actually kind of co-related to the financial services, is that, how do I make sure that fraud detection and all different things, right? And then there are very interesting one, there's another one, is the product design and creation. So we actually seeing some of the startup came out that co-design with AI. So there are, for example, fabric co-design with AI. Right? And then there are even parts that co-design with AI. And if you give that goal of using the least material, but still not compromise the structure, the strength of the structure, what kind of different variations can you create it? So there are many different innovations going into this space. It's quite interesting. Manufacturing, so this is probably one of the mature ones that we have known. So the manufacturing process, defect inspections, and product maintenance, and same thing as a product, for example, the supply chain management, quality assurance, product design, all goes into manufacturing. Healthcare is quite interesting because 80 or 90% of unstructured data exist in healthcare, right? So we think about healthcare, many of them think about patient records, but there are so many images and videos in the healthcare industry, and 80 and 90% of them, based on recent report, are still unstructured. So in this space, then we see patient monitoring system, we see clinical workflow optimization, there are diagnosis. For example, we see, we talk about radiology. Radiologists will be replaced by AI, right? Because they never get tired and you can work 24/7. And then there's clinical trial participation. Clinical trial is one of the largest expenses in drug development, or sometimes in anything FDA approval needed. But how do you recruit and filter and track the clinical trial participants? That's a huge part of it. And then there's a personalized care, right? So think about, for example, dosage management. So as you getting older and older, the daily pills you're taking is cocktail, right? So how do you know how the drugs that kind of working together as overall package should you take at different time for the best outcome? And then there's insurance, right? Insurance, there's a fraud detection, there's outcome assessment, and then of course there's cybersecurity as well, because we all know that this is really critical information for us. And the last category in financial services, then we use it on a daily basis. There's the compliance, the fraud detection, there's the digital and data security, there's the payment processing, and there's algorithm trading, right? So we know the stock market recently has been up and down, and there are a lot of firms that are using, actually it's one of the earliest use cases for AI algorithm trading, right? For PE firms, for trading desks. So all of this in combined, you can see that this all different use cases in each of the sectors are making things very, very interesting.
Those are fantastic examples, and it serves us really well because I think the point you're making is, we'll think about autonomous driving, or maybe we'll think about Alexa and these one or two things that we associate with AI. but actually it's prolific and it's usable and used in so many different areas, and those use cases are just exploding. Like, I want to change the discussion a little bit. Those are all fantastic opportunities, and many of them I think we're putting AI into play now. But equally, there's a whole set of concerns that are emerging in the industry, data selection, automation, annotation challenges, and all of the stuff around model bias that comes in, ground truth, and how do you get it right, et cetera. Talk to us a little bit about that, and how do we manage our way through it so that we do this in a very productive and effective way?
Oh, that's a great question. That's the multi-billion-dollar question to be answered. Well, when we look into the data strategy, and then the reason I will talk about data strategy is so many companies talking about AI strategy, and before they even have a very clear data strategy, right? So data, there are different steps. The first one, what kind of information do you collect, and how do you normalize the data, annotate the data so you can have the correct insight? And then you talk about building models and talk about deploy it, talk about scale it. But the first one, right? So we're talking about, now everyone's saying data is the king. So everyone's trying to accumulate so much data. And that actually create a lot of inefficiency as well. So one of the recent study is conducted, actually information provided by Seagate and also IDC in 2020, which is the last year. So they have shown that of all the enterprise customers that have served so far, of all the operation data, there are roughly about 68% of them are uncaptured and unused, right? So some of the data just park in the data lake and never get retrieved and used. So that itself, not only talk about, can be resources consuming to capture the data, store the data, but also protect the data from cyber attacks, right? So I think enterprise really need to think about strategy. What depends on the outcome. What do you really want the data to draw the insight from, and what kind of data, high quality of data that you're collecting that can direct to the, otherwise it could be noises out there, right? And the second part you actually touch on a little bit is that what do you make out of it? How do we build ground truth? So in data science industry, what we call it garbage in, garbage out, which means that if you have the really noisy, low quality of data feeding to the model, you're going to come up with something that not that accurate. That's the understanding, right? So that's when we talk about, here the industry talk about the bias of data. So if you feed the training data all the biased information, it will spit out the biased outcome. So I think a few years ago, someone did a little bit research, like it's a test. So basically, if you start feeding, you train a well-behaved, well-thinking, balanced thinking bots right there, right? So to give responses for customers. And then you start give some biased views and then getting informations extremist from Twitter and other social media. And then just within 2 days, this chatbot become basically racist and really bad language came out from these responses. So that's just one of the examples. So when we're talking about, we're trying to say why is the model making issues? We should also look into what kind of data you are feeding to the model to build the ground truth.
It's amazing. There's so much to cover and so much to double click in, and I'm sure that we'll have you back again. But I think the point you made about the opportunities we see in such a broad, everyday walks of life across these different industries, and yet some of the challenges we need to solve together, collectively, and working collaboratively around that are so important. And I'm super delighted that you could spend a few minutes of your time with us and take our audience through it. I'm sure there's going to be some follow-up questions and back and forth, and I'd love for you to sort of participate in that. Thank you, Lake, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.
Yeah. Goodbye, everyone.